I had a trial lesson. I knew within 5 minutes, nope, this teacher's not for me. And then, another trial lesson, I was like, yes, you're the one. Finding a great violin teacher can make or break your progress on the violin, because the key to doing well is getting good instruction. But not all teachers are great at teaching. And it's important that you get on well with your teacher as well. There should be a good rapport. And if you already have a teacher, if it's not going as great as you'd like, maybe it's time to look for a new teacher. Hi, I'm Michelle, the Intentional Violinist, and this channel is all about sharing what I've learned through experience and research as an adult learner of the violin. So how do you find a violin teacher? Well, it might be as easy as going on Google, right? Where we go to search for everything these days, but it might not, because a lot of teachers won't have a website or any sort of web presence. It's still very traditional and old school. Word of mouth is something that's highly relied on still in this industry. So you might be able to find some teachers on Google, and I'd recommend starting there, because at least then if they have a web presence, you can find out some information about them and get some background to figure out if they might be right for you before reaching out. But if you can't find anybody on Google, or, you found a few, but that's not really working out, then reach out to luthiers, local orchestras, or schools that have music programs and ask them if they have a list of teachers in the area. When you make contact with a teacher, you're going to want to ask a number of things. This is how we're going to find a great violin teacher. We're not just going to go to the first person that we locate. We're going to make sure that they're right for us. But the very first thing that you should be asking them is about availability, because you don't want to waste their time or yours. And if they don't have availability that works for you, then it's not going to work out anyway. What times and days of the week do they have available for lessons? If that doesn't work with your schedule, then, thank them for their time and move on. Experience takes so many different forms when it comes to teaching the violin. If you are able to find information about the teachers online, whether they have a web presence and you're looking at their website, or you've gotten a list of potential teachers and you're just Googling their names, see what you can find out about them online. That's really helpful to give you some background information. You do want to ask questions to the teacher before you commit to taking lessons with them, but you don't want to pepper them with 5,000 questions like it's a job interview, even though it sort of is, but that might turn some people off. So see what you can find out online first. And the sorts of things that I would try to find out about online are not necessarily the things that I would ask about, but what sort of experience do they have playing, right? When do they start playing? What do they do now? Do they play in an orchestra? Do they get paid to play in that orchestra? Because getting a paid orchestra position is actually pretty coveted and difficult to get. So that would definitely speak to the level of their playing, how well they play, how advanced they are. Then getting onto the list of questions that we might ask our teacher: do you have experience teaching adults? Okay, that's going to be your biggest question to ask after availability, because a lot of teachers don't have a lot of experience teaching adults, or have mostly taught children, or they have a bias even toward teaching adults. A lot of people don't believe that adults can reach an advanced level of playing. Many violinists start out when they're playing at the age of 4 or 5 or 6, and they play for decades before they reach this really advanced level, and they're in their 20s. And, here we are in our 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, and we're just taking up the violin. And there's this belief like you're never gonna be as good as any of these other players. You could never reach an advanced level of playing. And I just don't think that that's true. I've been able to make a lot of advancements in my playing, high level thinking, ear training, and just an overall way of looking at the violin that, takes people many, many more years to learn and get there. But there's a lot of teachers that still have this bias that you're not going to be able to learn advanced level. And so you don't want to get stuck with a teacher like that. They're not going to be that invested in you. And you want somebody invested. You want somebody who believes in you and believes that you can do it. It's so, so important because the violin can be quite frustrating to learn. And I'm not even just talking about bowing straight or playing the right note. No, there's all of these other things. Like once your ear starts to develop more and you can hear where, the note is, right? You're playing, you put your finger down and you're like, oh, that's not right. And you like move your finger just a little tiny bit. You just like slide just a little tiny bit into the note because then now you're on it and you can hear it. And when your ear gets to that point where you can hear the notes, now everything else just starts to irritate you. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't play as well as I did 2 months ago. And that's not true. You do. You play better, but you sound worse to yourself now because your ear has developed and your hands have to catch up. And it's just a constant evolving game of that. I'm not going to get into how to deal with that right now. Deal with those frustrations and combat that. But, that is something that you experience. And so at times like that, having a teacher who believes in you is just so crucial because, it can feel very frustrating at times. And you need to have someone who believes that you're doing great things, that you're going to continue to do great things, and is there to give you that pick me up, right? To keep you positive and playing. So find out if they have experience teaching adults, how many adults they've taught, maybe how advanced some of their adult students have gotten, and ask about their overall teaching experience as well. How long have they been teaching? Someone who's been teaching for maybe 5-10 years at least, has some more experience under their belt, and they're going to be able to do a better job explaining things to you and leading you down the path that you want to go. If you've already been studying with a teacher for a little bit now, tell me in the comments below what you like about your teacher, what you don't like about your teacher, as we're thinking about what makes a good violin teacher and what we should be looking at. It'd be helpful, I think, for all of us to learn from each other's experiences. Teaching style and methods is an interesting question. And I think you should definitely ask that of any potential teacher. What's your teaching style? What methods do you use? There's a number of books out there that you can use for teaching the violin. In the beginning, there's Suzuki method, very, very popular today. There's the Essential Elements book. There are, some other books that you could get. There's also scale books. There are etude books. And so there's a whole bunch of different resources, different books to learn from. I'm not saying any one is necessarily better or worse than the other, but asking your teacher what they use and, why they use it can be a revealing question. And then, what's their teaching style? And that's really an interesting one because I don't find that anybody really knows how to answer that when it comes to the violin. But, the teaching style really comes down to how do you approach a student? Do you have a one-size-fits-all method? Do you use Suzuki book and you only use Suzuki book and you're very set to that? Because while that method has its pros and its cons, you want someone who is able to adapt to the student. You want someone who's able to say, okay, this isn't working for the student. We're going to try this instead. And you want someone who's able to explain things. If you're stuck on something, they can explain it in a different way. Maybe they have a different book or teaching method that they can introduce to try to get you over this hurdle. So somebody who's able to adapt and approach each student individually, there's no one-size-fits-all method, is really going to be a trait of a great violin teacher. So after you have made some inquiries to potential teachers, you've asked them some questions up front and gotten answers to that, and you felt good about those answers, you weren't turned off by anything that they said, you'll want to ask them for a trial lesson. And every great violin teacher is going to allow you to have a trial lesson. If they don't, I would look somewhere else because are so valuable and crucial to seeing if the relationship is going to work. And every great teacher knows that. So ask them for a trial lesson. And what you'll do at this trial lesson is you'll show up and have your violin. Maybe they'll talk to you more about what your level of experience playing is. If you have none, it'll be none. But if you have played a little bit already, what book have you worked out of? How far have you gotten? What skills do you feel like need more work? And what are your goals, right? What are you trying to accomplish? Do you want to play in an orchestra? Do you want to play with other people? Do you just want to play for yourself at home? And then they'll have you play something. So if you've already been playing before, they'll just ask you to play something you've already played. If you haven't, maybe they'll just start at the very basics and they'll just get a feel for where you are and they'll comment. They'll give you feedback on your playing and what you can change and do to improve. And it's kind of like a little mini lesson. You get to experience what it feels like to have a lesson with that teacher. And during this time when you're playing and you're getting feedback, that's your time to really see, do you feel comfortable with this person? Because comfort is everything, right? If there's a level of comfort and rapport, then you're going to do pretty well with that teacher. If you don't feel comfortable, if you feel like everything you say, they're not understanding you or taking it the wrong way, if they're explaining things and you don't understand it and they don't try to explain it again in a different way, you're still not getting it, you're not on the same page, then maybe that's not working, If you are comfortable talking with that person and you feel like you're understanding what they're saying, and maybe you're even making some progress on the violin in that time, that's a great sign that this is a good violin teacher. It's somebody that you may want to study with for the next year or a couple of years to come. The trial lesson is really important for discovering whether or not this teacher is right for you, because you can have a trial lesson and learn immediately, nope, I had a trial lesson. I knew within 5 minutes, nope, this teacher's not for me. And then, another trial lesson, I was like, yes, you're the one. You're the teacher for me. You're wonderful. So it's really important to do that. Now, don't expect to get the trial lesson for free. It's going to cost the same amount as a regular lesson of that time slot would. And, that's because you're paying for their time, right? They are taking the time to meet with you. Just like if you had signed up for a lesson, it was your first lesson. And while it may be a good experience or it may be a bad experience, odds are you will learn something from that experience that you can take away. I would recommend doing a few trial lessons with a few different teachers, just so you can experience different people, different personalities, different styles, especially if you've never played the violin before or you're very, very new to it. You're not necessarily going to know that this teacher is way better than this teacher from a trial lesson if you only have one, right? Having those differences to compare, just like anything else in life, is really valuable. So I would definitely recommend multiple trial lessons, with multiple teachers before making a decision and committing. Final considerations on finding a great violin teacher are going to come down to cost and time. How much do you feel comfortable spending on violin lessons every month? And how much time do you want to commit to learning the violin? Going rate for violin lessons is somewhere around $1 per minute. So if you have a 30-minute lesson, $30. If you have a 60-minute lesson, $60. And some teachers are going to charge more or less depending upon the area that you live in. A really rural area might be cheaper. A big city is certainly going to be more. And then it also might come down to your teacher's level of experience teaching. Somebody who's been teaching for a long time and is very good at it might charge more than someone who's newer to teaching. And so then you'll want to decide how much time you have to commit to the violin and how much time you really want to commit to it. If you want to practice at least an hour every day, then, you might want to have an hour lesson every week. But if you don't have as much time to commit to practice, then maybe you want a shorter lesson. Maybe you only want half an hour lessons every week. And whatever you choose is completely up to you, right? It's your journey of learning. Only you can decide what's right for you. But if you are just starting out and you've never played the violin before, 30-minute lessons once a week might actually be best, because it really does take a lot of stamina to hold a violin up. You have your arm up, and it's very lightweight. I mean, this violin weighs, maybe like a pound. But if you're holding up the violin and then you've got the bow, for an hour when you've never played violin before, it can be very tiring. Half an hour lessons might be much better when you're starting out, right? And then you can increase later on. And then, the other consideration really comes down to whether you're going to have in-person lessons or online lessons. So many things are online nowadays, and online lessons are actually really accessible to us, which is awesome and amazing and just opens up so many doors. But when you're first starting the violin and you've never done it before, I think it's really important to have in-person lessons. And that's because you're just starting out. It's like, how do you hold the violin? How do you hold the bow? You might have your hand like this, and your teacher's going to tell you, nope, you need to put your hand down. And they can just come and they can just grab it and they can show you and demonstrate. It's also a lot easier to see what they're doing on their violin if you're in person, if they're trying to show you how, they're holding it or they're doing it, because then you're not just stuck with the camera angle that you have for virtual lessons, right? You can move around, you can see from different angles. And so that's really, really helpful in the beginning when you don't know how to hold the violin, you don't know how to hold the bow, you're getting used to it. It's awkward, it's not intuitive, and you really need that instruction. And they're able to see what you're doing really well too, because they're not stuck with one camera angle. They can move around and look at different angles of what you're doing. So if you have the option, then I would definitely recommend you have in-person lessons in the beginning. If you live in a really rural area and that's just not an option, okay, then let's do online, right? But if you do live in a metropolitan area that has teachers, I would definitely recommend in person. And then what I actually like best is not just in person, but a hybrid of in person and online. That way, when I'm sick or my kids are sick or, I don't know, there's snow or something else happens, I'm still able to have my lesson even though I can't make it in person. I just do it virtually. And so that works out really well. That's something that you'll want to ask the teacher as well when you're inquiring in the beginning. Do you have online availability? Can we do a hybrid and a mix of that? What if you want to learn the violin on your own? I mean, there's YouTube, right? There's all these people who are going to tell you how to learn the violin online, right? You don't need a teacher. And I think that's a really interesting conversation, and one that we'll be having in a variety of ways over many, many videos in the future, because you really need to think about things on your own, ask your own questions, experiment. But having an actual violin teacher is really, really important in the beginning because of what we were just talking about with in-person versus online lessons, right? You don't know what you don't know yet. And there is a lot to know about the violin. It's going to take you a long time to know everything there is to know about the violin. It is definitely a complex instrument. And especially in the beginning, when you're first trying to learn how to hold the violin, how to hold the bow, if you don't do it in a good way, right? And I won't say the right way, because there are multiple different ways to hold the violin, hold the bow. But if you don't do it in a good way, then you might build some bad habits that are going to lead to injuries down the road, or just make it more difficult for you to do certain techniques as you advance. And so there are good ways and there are bad ways, and we don't always know what those are when we're beginning. So I definitely recommend having a teacher. If there's not one local to you, then you will be able to find one online. But that being said, this channel is all about learning the violin and learning all of these things that you may not learn with your teacher or have time to, and going really deep diving into complex topics. So definitely also spend time experimenting and learning online from others as to how to play the violin and follow the journey that you want to in learning the violin. So that leads us to our final thoughts, that it is your journey. You are the intentional violinist. You're the one who intentionally chose to pick up the violin in your adulthood. So you should take the path that you want to take. Make sure that you find someone you're comfortable with, that you're happy to see every week and is advancing you towards your goals. I can only help to give you some advice on some questions to ask and what to look for, but in the end, the decision is yours. And if you pick a violin teacher and you find it's not really working, then don't be afraid to look for another one and start with someone new. What's important is that you're happy with your learning and your progress on the violin, that you feel comfortable and you're happy with where you're going. So if you found any of this information helpful, the best way that you can support the Intentional Violinist is to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications so you can become a part of our Intentional Violinist community. Until next time, keep practicing. You resist the urge to buy the cheap and convenient violin. These low-priced violins are what we refer to as VSOs, violin-shaped objects. And trying to learn the violin on a VSO is one of the quickest ways to guarantee frustration.